Welcome to the WIDA Access Accommodations Overview Training for 2024-2025. This training is required for test administrators who will administer WIDA Access assessments to English learners with accommodations. WIDA provides the English language proficiency assessments in Indiana. This includes screener placement assessments and access annual assessments. ELP assessments are used to identify and assess ELs and are federally required under the Every Student Succeeds Act, as ELs are a protected class under civil rights law. It is a federal requirement that 100% of identified ELs participate in the annual ELP assessment. Not being in compliance with identification and placement timelines and annual assessment participation requirements can impact a corporation or school's federal funding. WIDA assesses the WIDA English Language Development Standards within the 4 language domains of listening, reading, speaking, and writing. The table on this slide details the 3 WIDA Access annual assessments that are available. Kindergarten Access for ELLs is a paper-based test and administered only to ELs in kindergarten. Access for ELLs online or paper is available to ELs in grades 1 through 12. Online testing is required in most cases. However, paper testing is available as an accommodation and in certain circumstances. For online testers in grades 1 through 3, the writing domain test is paper-based. The handwriting accommodation is available for online testers in grades 4 through 12 on the writing domain test. Large print and braille test forms are paper-based only and require transcription into a scannable test booklet for scoring. WIDA Alternate Access is a paper-based test and produced in large print. It is administered to ELs in grades K through 12 with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Only ELs who meet or are expected to meet Indiana's alternate measure, I AM, participation criteria should participate in alternate access. ELs who participate in iLearn must participate in the standard access assessment. The alternate access participation criteria decision tree can also be used to inform eligibility. Please note that paper-based testing requires some local scoring by the TA. In general, only ELs with disabilities are eligible to receive accommodations on WIDA access assessments. WIDA assessment accommodations must be formally documented in a student's individualized education program, non-public service plan, choice special education plan, or Section 504 plan. As a reminder, individual learning plan accommodations do not apply to WIDA access assessments. A non-standard assessment accommodation request can be made in certain circumstances, such as paper testing for a student who is unable to access the online assessment, or scribe for a student with a broken arm. This slide lists IDOE Office of Student Assessment resources pertaining to WIDA assessments and accessibility and accommodations. It is important to familiarize yourself with the WIDA assessment guidance and Section 4 of the Accessibility and Accommodations information for statewide assessments. WIDA's approach to assessment is rooted in the understanding that ELs have diverse learning needs and styles. All ELs are capable of making progress towards English language proficiency, and ELs must acquire discipline-specific language practices that enable them to interpret and produce language to effectively collaborate on content-related, grade-appropriate tasks. WIDA's accessibility and accommodations framework is displayed on this slide. This framework was designed to ensure the following: application of effective linguistic scaffolding and universal design principles to the development of test items, availability of flexible administrative considerations and universal tools for all students, and purposeful design and delivery of accommodations for students with disabilities. WIDA provides guidelines for how to best support students taking access through the Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. WIDA developed this manual to help educators understand and use the administrative considerations, universal tools, and accommodations for individual ELs in order to produce valid assessment results. Please note that modifications are not allowed on ELP assessments as they change what the test measures. In addition to detailing the available accessibility supports and accommodations available for WIDA assessments, the Accessibility and Accommodations Manual also includes appendices with transcription guidance, scribing guidance, and accommodations checklist for each assessment. Please note that WIDA guidelines do not replace or amend state-specific policies. Refer to Indiana's Accessibility and Accommodations information for statewide assessments and the WIDA assessment guidance for state-specific guidance. Accommodations checklists can also be downloaded individually in the WIDA Secure portal under Resources. IDOE strongly recommends using the appropriate accommodations checklist during a case conference committee meeting when determining which accommodations should be included in a student's formal plan. This will prevent accommodations that are not applicable to a particular assessment and thus cannot be provided to the student from being inadvertently included in the student's formal plan. For example, the manual control of item audio, MC, and repeat item audio, RA, accommodations are only applicable to Access Online and Access Paper grades 1 through 12 assessments. They do not apply to kindergarten access or alternate access and should not be included as an accommodation for kindergarten and alternate testers. The next two slides detail WIDA-specific accommodations and codes. These accommodations must be documented in a student's formal plan or approved as a non-standard assessment accommodation in order for the student to receive them on a WIDA assessment. These accommodations must also be indicated in the student's WIDA AMS profile. Availability of WIDA-specific accommodations varies by WIDA assessment, test domain, and testing mode. Review WIDA's Accessibility and Accommodations Manual and IDOE's Accessibility and Accommodations information for statewide assessments for more details on each accommodation and to which domain tests each applies. Indiana does not recognize extended testing of a test domain over multiple days, EM, as an accommodation. In general, listening, reading, and speaking domain tests should be completed on the same day as started. However, approval is not required to complete these domain tests across multiple days if more time is needed or an interruption to testing occurred. The writing domain test must be completed on the same day that it was started with no exceptions. Braille and large print assessments require transcribing student responses into scannable test booklets. Refer to Appendix B of WIDA's Accessibility and Accommodations Manual for transcription guidance. Student responses that have not been transcribed into a scannable test booklet cannot be scored. IDOE is unable to approve requests for transcriptions by the test vendor due to state reporting timelines. These are the remaining WIDA-specific accommodations available to students with a documented need. Accommodations noted as embedded must be selected in WIDA AMS prior to testing in order for the students to receive the accommodations on Access Online. If administering a test to a student with the scribe accommodation, refer to Appendix C of WIDA's Accessibility and Accommodations Manual for scribing guidance. There are 3 Indiana-specific WIDA accommodations available to students with a documented need. Since these accommodations are Indiana-specific, they cannot be indicated in a student's WIDA AMS profile and require some manual actions by the test coordinator and/or TA. The paper testing accommodation allows an EL in grades 1 through 12 who is unable to access or participate in online testing to instead participate in Access Paper. Students with a paper testing accommodation documented in their formal plan and reported via the pre-ID file will not be registered for online tests in WIDA AMS, but instead will receive access paper test materials with initial orders. For students who need access paper but do not have a paper testing accommodation, the non-standard assessment accommodation request form must be submitted for approval. If approved, the student must be manually removed from online test registrations in WIDA AMS, and an additional materials order for access paper can be placed. Some examples of students who may need to participate in access paper without a paper testing accommodation include the following: a refugee student with limited or no formal education or exposure to technology, a student with religious objections to technology use, a student with a temporary medical condition such as a concussion, a student residing in a facility without internet access such as a hospital or correctional facility. The handwriting for WIDA Access online writing domain accommodation allows online testers in grades 4 through 12 to access the writing test items via the online platform and handwrite their responses in a paper writing response booklet. This accommodation cannot be designated by IDOE in the pre-ID file to DRC. Therefore, students must be manually removed from the regular online writing test registration and then assigned to an online HW handwriting test registration in WIDA AMS. As well, the Corporation Test Coordinator or WIDA Test Coordinator must place an additional materials order for writing response booklets. The exempt accommodation allows an EL whose disability always prevents meaningful participation in one or more language domains to be exempt from participating in the specific domain test or tests and, in most cases, receive adjusted overall composite scale score and proficiency level calculations. This allows the student the opportunity to meet Indiana's exit criteria without participating in all 4 test domains. Some examples of when this accommodation might be appropriate include an EL who is deaf and unable to participate in listening, or an EL who is nonverbal and unable to participate in speaking. Braille test takers may be exempt from speaking, as that domain test relies heavily on graphics. This slide outlines the steps for ensuring students with domain exemptions receive an adjusted overall composite scale score and proficiency level. Not completing one or more of these steps may prevent a student with domain exemptions from receiving a less than 4 domains calculation. First, ensure the exempt accommodations are documented in the student's formal plan and that the student's formal plan will still be valid during the WIDA Access test window. Domain exemption determinations must be agreed upon by the case conference committee. Second, report the domain exemptions via the WIDA Access Domain Exemptions JOT form. The Office of Student Assessment will verify exempt accommodations for reported students. Please ensure you submit complete and accurate information. A copy of each submission response will be emailed to the Corporation Test Coordinator and to the person who submitted the form if different. Keep this for your records to prevent duplicate submissions. Follow-up emails will only be sent for exempt accommodations that cannot be verified in the student's formal plan. If you do not receive a follow-up email within 5 business days, then the domain exemption is approved. JOT form submissions should be made by Friday, January 10th, unless reporting a new EL student identified during the test window, or if a student's accommodations changed after that date. Do not administer testing to the student until 5 business days after the JOT form submission to allow time for verification. Please note that Access Online exempt domains will be forced into completed status when the test window opens. If the student is exempt from Access Online listening and/or reading, do not proceed with administering speaking or writing until tier placement is confirmed in WIDA AMS. Tier placement change requests can be submitted via the WIDA Access Action Request form. Finally, during the test window, the test coordinator or TA must mark the exempt domains with Do Not Score code SPD, Special Education, in WIDA AMS for online testing or on the back cover of the test booklet for paper testing. Confirm that Do Not Score codes were marked accurately during the pre-reporting data validation window. An adjusted overall composite scale score and proficiency level can only be calculated for students who participate in 2 or 3 test domains, and if all 3 steps were completed. Please note that these calculations occur outside of WIDA AMS, therefore they are not included in DRC's reporting. Instead, IDOE reports the results with final state reporting annually in July via the EdData WIDA Access Enrollment Report. Translation of directions in a student's native language is only permissible when using an approved translated script. New for 2024-2025, WIDA will provide translated access online test administrator scripts in the 16 most common languages reported across the consortium. Translated test administrator scripts are available for download in the WIDA Secure portal under Resources. Please note that translated scripts are not available for the Access Online Grade 1 and Grades 2-3 writing domain, as the test administrator script for writing in those grade levels contains secure test content. A non-certified proctor who is fluent in the scripted language may read the scripted directions to students. However, this must only occur under the direct supervision of a certified TA. Since the translated scripts do not include any secure test content, a recording of the scripted directions can also be made and used for test administration. Per WIDA and Indiana assessment policy, test item prompts and responses must never be translated for the student, as this would impact the validity of the assessment. However, it is permissible to translate, rephrase, and explain directions on the test practice site to ensure students understand the mechanics of taking the test and become familiar with the test platform and item types. The following modifications would alter the set of knowledge, skills, and abilities measured by WIDA assessments and, as such, are not allowed during test administration. Reading aloud items on the reading domain test, providing oral or written translations of test items into a language other than English, allowing student responses in a language other than English, allowing the use of a bilingual word-to-word dictionary, signing items, passages, or response options. However, it is permissible for an interpreter to sign test logistics, directions, and practice items, allowing the use of scratch paper on the speaking domain test. If a testing irregularity occurs, the TA should immediately report the situation to the Corporation Test Coordinator, WIDA Test Coordinator, or School Test Coordinator, and a testing irregularity report should be submitted. Await guidance from IDOE before proceeding with testing for any impacted students. The following are some examples of testing irregularities. A student is provided with unallowable supports or modifications as detailed on the previous slide. A student is provided with an accommodation in error. In other words, the accommodation is not in the student's formal plan and is not an approved non-standard assessment accommodation. A student is not provided with an accommodation as documented in the student's formal plan. A student is administered the incorrect access test or tier, such as an alternate access tester being administered access online, or a student placed in Tier A is administered a Tier B/C writing test booklet. A student starts or completes another student's test, also known as a test ticket swap. A student resumes the writing test on a different day than it was started. The pre-ID file is a student data file that IDOE submits to DRC annually in November for the WIDA Access Test Administration. The pre-ID file populates student data and online test registrations in WIDA AMS and generates initial materials orders. The WIDA Access pre-ID file is primarily populated via data exchange. Most EL student data, including Section 504 plan and CSEP accommodations, is transferred from school information systems via data exchange. IEP and non-public service plan accommodations are extracted from Indiana IEP and incorporated into the pre-ID file. ELs identified after data is extracted for the pre-ID file in November and/or changes in student demographic or accommodations data after that time must be manually added or updated in WIDA AMS. WIDA AMS test setup is available beginning Tuesday, December 3rd, and remains open through the WIDA Access test window. Schools should verify that all ELs, demographic information, accommodations, and test registrations appear in WIDA AMS as expected and in advance of WIDA Access testing. An additional materials order may need to be placed for ELs not included in the pre-ID file. A request for district school labels might be necessary as well. Contact data reporting help if assistance with data exchange or state reporting is needed. ELs with an IEP or non-public service plan must be indicated as participating in an ELP assessment in Indiana IEP. The first step in doing so is to mark yes under special considerations for needs related to English language proficiency. The option to indicate which ELP assessment the student will participate in will then become available. Select English language proficiency assessment with or without accommodations to indicate kindergarten access or WIDA access. Select alternate English language proficiency assessment with or without accommodations to indicate alternate access. If an alternate access tester was not reported correctly in the pre-ID file, then manually remove the student from Access online test registrations and place an additional materials order for alternate access materials if needed. Additionally, the WIDA alternate access checkbox can be marked under the Details tab of the student's WIDA AMS profile to indicate participation. A selection of with accommodations will allow WIDA-specific accommodations to be selected for the student if daily classroom accommodations are indicated. For access paper testers, ELP assessment with accommodations must be selected and the paper assessment accommodation must be marked under WIDA accommodations. Otherwise, the student will be defaulted to access online, and access paper materials will not be included in the initial materials order shipment. Accommodations that are noted in a text box within the IEP rather than selected under WIDA assessment accommodations cannot be extracted for the pre-ID file. Accommodations not included in the pre-ID file must be manually added in WIDA AMS. As previously stated, WIDA-specific accommodations can be manually added and updated in a student's profile in WIDA AMS beginning on December 3rd. This is done in Student Management under the Accommodations tab of a student's profile. More specific instructions can be accessed within the online help guide by selecting the question mark icon located at the top right corner of the Student Management screen and then selecting Editing Students' Accommodations. Accommodations marked in WIDA AMS must be documented in the student's formal plan. Providing test accommodations that are not included in a student's formal plan will result in test invalidations. As a reminder, a testing irregularity report must be submitted in such instances. Please note that the following accommodations are embedded and affect the behavior of the online test platform. Therefore, they must be selected in a student's WIDA AMS profile prior to Access Online Test Administration. MC, Manual Control of Item Audio, RA, repeat item audio, ES, extended speaking response time. TAs must verify that all information on students' online test tickets is correct and that each test ticket is given to the correct student. Accommodation codes for all WIDA accommodations selected in a student's WIDA AMS profile will appear on the test ticket if applicable to the test domain. If NA is listed, then the student is not assigned any accommodations in WIDA AMS. The sample test ticket on the left shows that the student has ES, MC, and RA accommodations for the speaking test. The sample test ticket on the right shows that the student does not have any accommodations assigned for the reading test. For students in grades 4 through 12 with the handwriting accommodation, test tickets must include HW to indicate the student is assigned to an online handwriting registration. As a reminder, students with the handwriting accommodation will access test items by logging into the online platform, but will handwrite their responses in a writing response booklet. Use caution when manually registering students for Access Online Writing in WIDA AMS. A common testing irregularity occurs when a student is assigned to an HW test in error and accesses the test without the handwriting accommodation and without a writing response booklet. To ensure paper test materials are processed, scored, and reported, it is imperative that a white pre-ID label or a yellow district school label is affixed to the front cover of used test booklets. TA should confirm that the correct student's pre-ID label is being used. If the pre-ID label is available, then only the date of testing needs to be filled in on the front cover of the test booklet. Student information in the pre-ID label and in WIDA AMS override any information bubbled on the front and back covers of the test booklet. If information on a pre-ID label is incorrect, the label can still be used, but the information should be corrected in WIDA AMS. Pre-ID labels are only generated for students submitted in the pre-ID file. If a pre-ID label is not available for a student, then a district school label must be affixed to the front cover of the test booklet in its place. The district school label must match the district and school to which the student is assigned in WIDA AMS. Additionally, student demographic information and accommodations must be accurately completed on the front and back covers of the test booklet. Information bubbled on test booklets must match the student's record in WIDA AMS exactly to avoid duplicate student records and split reporting. Do not process labels are also available and should be affixed to test booklets containing a pre-ID label, district school label, bubbled student information, and/or student responses that should not be scored. Unlabeled blank test booklets can be returned as is. A do not process label is not necessary. Appendix B of the WIDA assessment guidance contains guidelines for completing student data on test booklets when a pre-ID label is not available. It specifies the required fields to be completed in order for the test booklet to be processed and reported correctly. Not all fields are required to be completed to match the test booklet to the student's record in WIDA AMS. Additionally, Appendix B contains guidance for coding alphanumeric STNs as 10-digit numbers on test booklets. Please note that in WIDA AMS, alphanumeric STNs must only be coded as 9 digits and with the leading letter. DRC will match the 10-digit STN coded on a test booklet to the 9-digit alphanumeric STN in WIDA AMS. The 9-digit alphanumeric STN is what will appear in reporting. Following these guidelines and accurately completing student information will ensure that test booklets are processed, scored, and reported as expected. This slide contains links to WIDA web pages and resources to help prepare students for testing. The monitor displays the test practice site, which hosts the test demo, sample items, and test practice for Access and Screener online assessments. Online test practice and sample items are available with accommodations. The test practice site can be accessed via a public URL or through DRC Insight if installed on the student device. As a reminder, it is permissible and encouraged to translate directions, guidance, practice test items, and sample items in a student's native language when using the test practice site to help the student become more familiar with the online testing platform and item types. Use of the test practice site is not required, as practice items are embedded at the beginning of each operational online assessment. However, IDOE strongly recommends allowing all Access online testers to use the test practice site prior to testing so they can experience the DRC Insight test platform. This will ensure they understand how to navigate through the operational test and Access embedded test tools and accommodations. Additional resources to prepare students participating in paper assessments can be found on WIDA's website. This slide contains state assessment, English learning, special education, and WIDA contacts and resources. Please reach out to the appropriate team when support is needed. This slide highlights important dates and milestones for WIDA assessments during the 2024-2025 school year. The WIDA Access Program Milestones resource provides more information on each of the milestones listed on this slide, as well as dates and links for WIDA webinars and IDOE's WIDA office hours. This concludes the WIDA Access Accommodations Overview training for TAs. Thank you for your time and attention. A copy of these slides and the script have been shared in the Indiana Assessment Updates listserv. Contact your corporation test coordinator or WIDA test coordinator for access.